wanted to get, into this podcast, obviously. And I don't know if you've been watching Pistons games. I don't know if you've been able to watch as many Pistons games, obviously, working a lot, starting your new podcast. But wanted to ask you, why do you think the season has been such a failure under this team, which we thought were going to win like 30 games? I know I did. I had, Chris on this week. He said like 40 games. Like, why do you think it's been so bad?
It's a great question. It's a complex question. I think there's a lot of things that go into it. It's funny, before the season, Lindsey Hunter, shout out to him, by the way, I love Lindsey, but he believed this team could make the playoffs without any additions. This was like during the offseason, last offseason. And I'm like, okay, Lindsey, maybe. I thought 30 games was realistic. Hell, they won 6 and we're in February. So a lot of things have gone wrong. I think a mix of, number one, I feel bad for Monty Williams. I think that's where my heart goes. I mean, you could criticize him all you want. I just think we all, Pistons fans, Pistons media, we kind of overrated the players they currently have, and maybe some of the players that were supposed to take a jump. Cade Cunningham, undoubtedly, he's been excellent to start the season. I know he's just coming off an injury, but he had injuries throughout the season, and there's not a lot of room for error with this team. I mean, they are up there in the NBA in turnovers, and they barely force turnovers. And you're terrible on defense, and they're not great on offense. Like it's a complete disaster. Now, you see the addition of Mike Muscala and Danilo Gallinari and what they've done. I mean, they still on like a 4-game losing streak, but for a minute there, they looked better with veterans. This team just has a ton of youth, man. It's a problem. Like the Zach LaVine stuff. And I got Zach LaVine out with an ankle surgery, which that's a whole nother thing I'm sure we'll get into eventually, because I think that's a good thing for the Pistons, to be honest with you, that he is no longer an option. It's bad. I've had to defend Troy Weaver. Now at this point, it's over. I mean, Troy is getting fried. And I think this trade deadline is hard because he spent time clearing all this cap space, but Anthony, who are you getting? Like there's no help coming. Like, I don't know how this thing gets better. Like, you look at the roster and how it's currently constructed, it's a disaster. Like, it's an absolute disaster. And you got Killian Hayes asking for a trade now. So apparently that's news, even though he's getting DNPs.
We're definitely going to get into Zach LaVine because there's so much to get into there with the reporting and obviously having surgery. Definitely going to get into Killian Hayes because why not? People think I hate Killian Hayes. They think I'm a Killian Hayes hater. I'm not. I just tell the truth. And I don't know, maybe the truth is hard for some people. They live in a bubble.
It's true.
But I think what you said, like maybe we kind of overrated the players that we had. Absolutely agree with that. I think sometimes when we watch our team and we're so involved, and there's some people out there like myself where they don't watch any other basketball teams. They're just strictly Detroit Pistons. And, sometimes maybe the media hypes it up a little bit. The media was, saying, oh, Pistons are going to go get Cam Johnson. No, we got Joe Harris and like Monte Morris. But I absolutely love Monte Morris. It's more of a Joe Harris slander, who doesn't play. And he's on a $19 million expiring. Like, I think there's so many things that went wrong this season. I think rotations with Monty Williams, he's very stubborn. We've seen that, you put the ball in Jaden Ivey's hands a little bit and he can score. Like Marcus Sasser's getting more playing time now. Mm-hmm. Like there's just been so much you could point to why it's gone wrong. And it's just like, you go down the list and it's like, man, I don't think they were ready for a coach like Monty Williams, in my opinion. I think they needed a younger guy. Like I was advocating for Kevin Ollie, Charles Lee, Jaron Collins. I thought like an assistant like that or a first-time coach like Kevin Ollie, maybe you don't get to the playoffs, but maybe instead of going from 17 to 25, that's progress. And maybe they're not at a 6 win. Maybe they're like at a 15-game clip right now if they bring in one of those assistants that can maybe relate to them because they're a little bit younger and relate to them on like a human level and a basketball level as well. But I just think Monty Williams, to me, he's a vets coach. I've never really viewed him as like a young player development coach like I did with Dwayne Casey.
Yeah, and especially for Monty. I mean, you saw Monty in his first year in Phoenix to his second year. Like, they drastically improved, but really what took them over the top was getting Chris Paul, who's an extension of a coach on the floor. Like, they don't have that. Like, it's youth everywhere, and that's a problem. Like, even in the start. And by the way, your point about the minutes is spot on. Like, why the hell is James Wiseman seeing the floor at all? Like, that is a whole nother. Like that's a whole nother. They have like what 7 guys in a bench rotation. Like that's too many. Like if you haven't figured out, and I know the bench is to some extent been a little overrated, but if you haven't figured out a rotation now in February, like there's a problem. And that's been the case. Like they're playing too many guys off the bench. Like Sasser should have already cemented himself in the rotation, but no. I mean, Jaden Ivey, and he's been playing well over the last like 10 games. He's averaging almost 20 points, 24-4. Like he's playing really well.
Yeah, we talked about last week where the way I see it, maybe, I overreact to everything, but I don't see the veterans getting called out during press conferences. I see Jaden Ivey constantly getting called out. Like the younger guys that you're supposed to lift up and develop, you're calling them out for every little thing. And to your point, like, yeah, if you don't have your rotation set in my opinion, by like December, you should know what your rotations are. You shouldn't need a quote unquote organizational meeting to say, hey, I just drafted Jaden Ivey 5th overall. He needs to play. Nothing against Killian Hayes. I just think you could play both of them if you wanted to. But to me, I think Killian should have always been an emergency like backup point guard. Like I much would rather have seen Marcus Sasser play a bulk of the backup point guard minutes until Monte Morris had come back this season. But I get it. Monty likes those tall guards that are defensive, and Killian doesn't make a whole lot of mistakes because he doesn't really shoot the ball. He just passes every little time. So he doesn't make a whole lot of mistakes or turnovers. So I get it from that standpoint, but I just think the season as a whole, it's a wash. I haven't even got into the draft this year because I'm just like, I know we're getting 5th. Like, it's just so depressing.
I'm so mad. I don't want to cover the 5th overall draft pick. I have no interest. Like, speaking of the 5th overall pick, like what's frustrated me the most, I think, this season with the Ausar Thompson storyline is in the beginning, he's starting, he's playing a ton of minutes, you're losing, but you're seeing his development. You're seeing him as a defender. You're seeing his upside. You're like, man, this guy defensively is great. Now shooting is a whole nother thing. And now we're in February and he's coming off the bench. It's like, what? What are we doing? If I signed up, and I think other Pistons, if you're going to win 6 games through all the way to February now, you better lose with the players you plan to have throughout the next 5 years. I don't want to see Kevin Knox in the starting. I don't want to see Mike Muscala starting at the 4. Like, I have no interest in that. Duran's development has been great. But the Ausar Thompson, and you mentioned it earlier with Ivy, like it seems, and I'm reading more quotes coming out of press conferences, and I know, Ivy's family is not fond of it either, and I don't blame him. Like I don't blame them. It's frustrating to see, especially for Ivy's playing so well, and he played well early in the season, but he's young. Like he's going to make mistakes, and it seems like he's taking, at least when he gets brought up, it's like these it's passive aggressive comments towards Ivy that I don't understand. So for me, if I'm going to win 6 games through February, it better be with the 5 or 4 at least, because you start looking for a 4, the 4 that you see as the future. Like there's no reason why Ausar should be playing minutes off the bench. When he's one of their best, they're probably their best perimeter defender, and they're one of the worst teams defensively. Like, how does that make any sense?
Yeah, there was a graphic that Bailey put out where like when he's off the bench versus on the bench, and like the net rating was over +10. Like you just said it, his defense alone impacts it. But it's like I could get into debates about Monty Williams rotations until I'm blue in the face, and I think I'll just be miserable. But to say that this season has been underwhelming would be, I think, an overstatement in my opinion.
And you know what's funny about the rotation stuff? It sounds like Dwayne Casey all over again. Remember, we were criticizing Dwayne for his rotation, and now it's the same thing year 1 of Monty. And I don't want to. I think your point you made about Monty being the coach, you put the cherry on top when the dessert's made, right? When this team's constructed, then you bring in a Monty. I think you're right. I don't know if Monty, although I think he's a good coach, and that's why I brought up the CP3 point. I don't know if this is the right roster right now for a guy like Monty. Like you're going to have to bring in, and I don't know where you go get these guys, but you're going to have to significantly upgrade this team to have any hope that Monty can put together a 40-win season. Like that and I don't know how you do it this offseason. I don't. Even if you have the 5th overall pick, Like this draft, at least from what I've read, isn't like it's been in prior years. And I know that's said every year, but I don't know how to fix it. Like this is the first season in a little bit here where I've been sitting here going, okay, there's a problem. How do we fix it? I don't have the solution. Like, like I don't know how Troy's going to figure it out because it seems like there's too many cooks in the kitchen anyway in the front office. And I don't know how much, control Troy has anyway. Yeah. So I don't know. Like I wish I had more hope for Pistons fans. There's barely any to be told. Just Cade Cunningham, who if I'm him and I'm his team, if this keeps up the way it is, I don't blame them for being like, man, we got to get you out of here. Like we got to get you out of here because your career is going to be smeared early on, like just because of the organization you're a part of. And I love the Pistons, but it sucks to say it. I mean, it does.
Yeah, you look at the free agents and it's like a lot of Pistons fans had your wish board for Pascal Siakam. That's obviously not going to happen. No. They had a wish board of OG Anunoby. It's not going to happen.
No.
You look at the top free agents. Like, are you getting James Harden? Probably not. Getting Paul George? No. Do you really want to throw the bag at Klay Thompson at this stage of his career? Probably not. You're going to get some mid-tier guys. And to your point, like, yeah, Chris Paul was a big reason why Phoenix took a big leap in the wins. Because you can go back and look at their record when Monty was coaching them. They were a lottery team. Apparently, like I know Chris Pilati said this last week, you just need a Hall of Fame point guard to turn this around, and we'll be back to the promised land. But
that's it. That's all you need.
I think it will get better. I'm scared shitless over these next 4 days of what's going to happen. I don't know if they're going to turn their attention to players like Tobias Harris, who's going to be a UFA. Maybe I mentioned it earlier. Andrew Wiggins seems like just the type of player that they would target. Not like an A+ player, but like a solid like B- player that could help out the defense a little bit. But he's been god awful this year for the Golden State Warriors. I think he's still grieving over the stuff that happened with his father. I don't know if his father passed away or not. I think he got sick or something like that the last time I read it. But there's just so many avenues they could go down, and it scares me because I haven't seen them be aggressive since Troy Weaver's first year as a GM. Like his first year as GM, I thought was his best year as a GM.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I just haven't seen that type of aggressiveness. I haven't seen that same type of like the same types of moves that he was making, like flipping Luke Kennard so he get Sadiq Bey, trading up to get Isaiah Stewart, drafting, Killian Hayes, obviously, who was a 7th overall pick, and a lot of people were high on him at that time. Some people in the comments will probably say they weren't high on him. I mean, from the consensus, most Pistons fans were pretty high on Killian Hayes. I fell victim to that. I have a Killian Hayes jersey in my closet, and I'm not too I will admit that.
It makes two of us.
Yeah.
That makes two of us.
I bought into the hype. Damn you, Kevin O'Connor.
Yeah. But to your point, though, about Troy Weaver, it seems like the last year or so, because even, forget me, Jalen Duren, he flipped that pick from Jeremy Grant. Like, you go and get Jalen Duren. Now we're like, hell yeah. Like, now you're being aggressive. You're building a young core. But it seemed like over the last year, it's been, and it spoke volumes in the offseason when you trade for a Joe Harris and a Monty Morris. It's like, I like the core we have now. And that goes back to the point we made about, did we severely overrate this core? Because this team isn't doing anything until guys take significant steps forward. And Cade Cunningham is already putting up, if they're winning games, he's putting up close to all-star numbers. So he's probably the last issue of concern. Ivy's looked better. But even for Duren, Ausar, the players that surround them, like you're going to have to, and maybe you can't go out and get to Chris's proposal there. Love it. Hall of Fame point guard. Maybe that's not on one of the options, but maybe you can start building around these guys. But at the end of the day, Anthony, it comes down to how much can these guys take the next step? Like, what does Jaden Ivey look like next year? Is he finally a 20-point scorer next to Cade Cunningham? Is Ausar Thompson, can he be a 30%, just 30% 3-point shooter? Like, can Duren be consistent in what he's been doing? Like, because he's been an animal. I mean, he didn't get a double-double this game, but he's been a 20-20 walking 10-10 guy for the last couple of weeks now. He's been great this season. Like, at the end of the day, the success falls on those guys' shoulders. Like, no one's coming to save this team. Tobias Harris will not save this roster. He's not saving next season. Like, those are complementary players at the end of the day. Like, that's just what they are. They're fourth options on good teams.
Yeah, and I think that's the route they're going to go. And it's sad because I thought last summer was the summer to have cap space. I thought there were guys out there like I thought if you wanted to take a flyer in Harrison Barnes, I would be okay with it. Like guys like Kyle Kuzma were available, Cameron Johnson, like I mentioned earlier. Like there were some guys out there that I thought, like, yeah, you could take a flyer on a Kelly Oubre maybe for a year or a Torrey Craig, but they didn't do anything. And you hear guys like Arn Tellem, who makes business decisions in the front office, saying like, hey, we didn't feel like there was a guy out there that really moved the needle. And for me, like I don't understand that. Like all those guys that I mentioned could help you in the win column and help you develop these young guys that we have. Like we have veterans on this team, but they're not vetting. Like, they're like Alec Burks is getting his buckets. Bojan is getting his buckets, but they're not like vetting. Like I go back and I don't know how old you were during the SVG era. They traded a draft pick of the name of Tony Mitchell. I don't know if that name rings a bell.
Yep. I remember Tony Mitchell. Yep.
And we traded for an unknown name of Anthony Tolliver. And Anthony Tolliver came into this organization. He was a perfect vet for the young guys, and the Pistons start going on this winning streak. And the reason why I mentioned that is like you can get pretty decent vets on the cheap. There's guys like Tony Snell right now that like needs a job. Like Tony Snell would be a perfect vet for this team. He might not get the Pistons a whole lot of wins, but he's a 3-and-D wing that Ausar Thompson can learn from. Like these guys at the end of the day, they need veterans that have played this game and they can help them win. And I think right now we have veterans. They're just not the vets that I think that can elevate this team to the next level. Like they don't have a veteran center that Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, or James Wiseman can learn from right now. They just don't. Like Marvin Bagley, for all intents and purposes, was supposed to be that vet, but they dealt him for Muscala and Gallinari, which I get why they did it. They wanted more cap space. They didn't want to pay that $12 million, but I think a goal for them this year is try to find a veteran center to teach these guys. Like you need legitimate veterans to help these players learn how to win, because they don't know, like they're talented, but they just don't know how to execute games. They don't know how to close games. Like they need real veterans to help them understand the game of basketball at the end of the day.